very much, and welcome everyone to our panel at this Open Data Institute Summit of 2021. Today, we are gathered here to think through and discuss whether the data really may save us. Are humans alone able to tackle the climate change issue? I'm joined by a distinguished panel of experts in their field, but before introducing them, here are some housekeeping notes that I have for you. One, we only have 36 minutes for this discussion, and we will try to keep it as precise as possible. If you have any questions, please use the Q&A function of Zoom to put that, and we will try to go through as many of them as possible. And finally, please only allow the panelists to have their mics and videos on, and this is to be considerate of any of our colleagues that might have bandwidth limitations. So to start off, I am going to introduce our three very distinguished panelists. I will start with Nicolas. Nicolas is the founder and president of the Future Society, and which is an independent policy think tank specialized in questions of impact on governance of AI. Nicolas is also an appointed expert to the Global Partnership on AI, GPAI, which has 19 member countries, where he co-chairs the Committee on Climate Action and Biodiversity Preservation. I'd like to give Nicolas a minute to just introduce himself and some of his work. Over to you, Nicolas.
Thanks a lot, Lynette, and hi, everyone. So I lead an independent think tank, which has been focused on really trying to advance the development of frameworks and protocols to help trigger responsible adoption of AI across a number of social problems, and obviously focused on the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. As part of some of our projects, there is the Global Data Access Framework, where we have worked with UNEP and others, such as the World Bank or UN Global Pulse, to try and create those frameworks, including the Global Partnership on Sustainable Data, of course, with Claire. There is also the AI Commons, which is really trying to bring together data models and domain knowledge expertise to advance these questions and create libraries and repositories. And now I'm very involved, as you said, with the Global Partnership on AI, where I started with my other co-chair, the Responsible AI Strategy for the Environment, a preliminary report of which we presented yesterday at the COP, which is really trying to help create a roadmap for governments and for international cooperation on advancing responsible AI adoption for AI, which includes better access, better sharing of data and digital infrastructure. That's really, and we will present and launch the report officially at the Global Partnership on AI Summit plenary next week in Paris. So stay tuned. I'll try and cover some of the points and recommendations in that discussion. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Nico. And next we have Païvi, who comes from Gaia Consulting. And Païvi is an experienced professional in strategy and business development, new business concepts, and innovative strategies. She's currently working on her PhD on the role and value of data in the circular economy at the University of Helsinki. Over to you, Païvi, for your 1 minute intro.
Thanks, Lynette, and it's a pleasure to be in this panel today and greetings from Helsinki, Finland. And as Lynette said, those are the positions I'm working with currently, and we are doing a lot of work with companies to transform their strategies towards circular business models and circular strategies from linear ones on several industry fields. And definitely out there, it seems that the more ambitious the companies are related to their climate commitments, for example, the more obvious and vital the role of data becomes. So when we look at the future, there is no environmentally sustainable future without the use of data. But definitely, it's a lot of questions out there, and that's what I'm doing with my PhD as well, try to solve those issues that we would see a better future in that sense. Thank you, Lynette.
Great. Thank you, Païvi, and I look forward to our discussion. And next we have Gaia, who is the program manager at Icebreaker One. She is also the co-founder and in addition to being the program manager at Icebreaker One, a nonprofit aiming to make data work harder to deliver net zero. Over to you, Gaia.
Thank you very much, Lynette. So yes, as Lynette mentioned, I'm Gaia. I'm the program manager and co-founder at Icebreaker One, and we are an independent, non-partisan, non-profit. And one of the things that I'm here to talk to you about today is actually Open Energy, which is our flagship program, where we're working directly with industry to develop a service that makes it easy to search, access and securely share energy data. And this is something that both Ofgem and the UK government have said that they're broadly supportive of energy data sharing solutions, and that Open Energy will help to bring together data held by thousands of organisations and institutions to enable an open marketplace and a net zero future. And so here at Icebreaker One, we really believe that by developing open standards through collaboration, that Open Energy can unlock sector-wide efficiency and innovation.
Great. Thank you very much, Gaia. I'm really looking forward to our conversation today. And finally, I am Lynette Kwamboka. I am the Africa Program Manager at the Global Partnership for Sustainable Development Data, and I will be the chair for this discussion. So moving on very quickly to the questions at hand today, I'd like to start off with Nico. What system level work are you and your organization doing with data to support climate action? You have a minute for this as well. Over to you, Nico.
Well, thanks, Lynette. So really the core of my work right now and the Future Society's work is really centered around the Global Partnership on AI. It's a 19 countries international organization, which was started originally within the G7 as an IPCC for AI, which is now housed at the OECD and works in close coordination with the OECD AI Policy Observatory and other international organizations. And that's something that we're trying to build at GPN. My role as the co-chair of the Committee on Climate Action and Biodiversity Preservation, and I could add circular economy because it is the economic paradigm of the future, really, to reconcile climate action and biodiversity preservation. Our work is really to try to help and inform these 19 governments with clear pathways, clear recommendations, and moving forward, trying to help them resolve when should we implement these recommendations, how, who, and how much. And in so doing, trying to reconcile and anchor our work with the IPCC, IPBES, UNFCCC, UNEP, and all the other key intergovernmental actors that can create the kind of international coordination and coalitions that we need to create the digital twins, for example, the data trusts, and the data infrastructure that we need to share data at a scale that the planet requires. These systems are so large and complicated that we need to pull more resource, more investment to be able to deliver value in a responsible way that honors privacy, fairness, transparency, and includes the global south. That's really what I'm trying to do over the past few months. Sorry, I'm a bit long. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Nico. And you talk about pulling more resources, into this work. Maybe over to you, Gaia. What are you doing? Are you putting in any resources at the Icebreaker to this conversation, to this work?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that we fundamentally believe is that improving access to data, and in particular energy data, is at the heart of our journey to a healthy and growing net zero economy. And this is something that's going to impact not just energy, but also transport, water, agriculture, and the built world. And it's something that we're going to need to see working across sectors. I think it's absolutely essential to our energy transition globally that we need to make. And it's a really, really important time to be having this conversation as COP's just kicked off. So that's one of the things that we're really trying to pour a lot of resource into. So specifically focusing on what are the rules behind data sharing, how do we facilitate that, and how do we build the business cases around it so that we can all see what the opportunities are.
Great, thank you. And Nico mentioned the circular economy, and I know that Païvi, this is your expertise. Can you talk to us a little bit about, what data infrastructure, information, and collaboration is needed to connect the different topic areas represented here, from what Gaia and Nico are talking about? Talk to us a little bit about the circular economy, the energy system optimization, the conversations, around conservation efforts. What are you doing? What efforts are you putting in? Tell us about your work.
Yeah, that's definitely a kind of, how would I say, you described well the field and the context. We are dealing with several big questions. Climate change is one. There is circular economy and need to kind of improve the value we get out from the materials. There is the biodiversity issues coming up as well, linking to these issues as well. And all of those issues we should understand, and also with data. But my background is in environmental economics, so I look from the side of the environmental benefits. And specifically out there, I see companies in need for different kind of transformations, be it in their business models, be it in their value networks or supply chains, or be it in their product design to make it so that it is energy efficient, it is material wise, etc. But how would I say, there is also a lot of complexities. There's both driving and retarding forces. For example, a product really climate wise could be using a lot of resources elsewhere, or being pollution to the waters, for example. So it definitely is, how would I say, complex problem. And that's what I like in our the title of today's discussion as well, that we can't really tackle this alone, but we need to take advantage of advanced tools to understand this complexity and make it, how would I say, understandable for us as well. So there definitely big challenges, but I always like to put data driven in front of the many environmental challenges, because then we at least have some additional tools to solve them.
Great. You've talked a lot about bringing organizations together and all the different aspects that can come in and work together to solve this problem. Nico, why are individual actions alone insufficient in this race that we are on to tackle the climate crisis?
Well, maybe let me walk you through a few of the bottlenecks vis-a-vis data and digital infrastructure that demands that us coming together. Well, number one, data required for AI for climate generally often do not exist. The current climate-related data discovery and access is still slow and inefficient. Third, climate-relevant data quality is often low, and there is a lack of data standards and protocols. And let's be clear, the incentive for organizations to share this climate-relevant data is often very low. And there is, let's also be very honest, insufficient protection against the development of what we call climate data monopolies. That's for data. Now, the bottlenecks for compute, as I said before, there's a lack of real-time digital representation, like digital twins of physical systems relevant to climate action, meaning climate, biodiversity, and circular economy. These are very complicated software and cloud and compute and data models. And there is also a lack of climate-specific AI model libraries, as much as there is a lack of affordable, scalable compute solutions for non-commercial applications. You see the magnitude of all these bottlenecks? The complexity of all these bottlenecks, the transnational nature of all these bottlenecks, we have to come together to solve them, public, private, and people partnerships. Otherwise, we're going to get stuck and we won't be able to adopt and trigger and harness the power of AI and data for climate action.
You bring about a very important point, and I'm going to, bring in a question from the audience in terms of bringing together the public, private, and all the standards that are needed, and the incentives and everything. So Gaia, over to you. Should government push for a single data standard or format to make it easier for people to get involved?
I don't think that's the solution. I think ultimately there's a really good XKCD comic that I refer to a lot, and it's basically it's this whole thing about how, oh, we have 14 standards, we need one standard to rule them all. Now we have 15 standards. It's a common pattern that we see. The problem isn't that we need one standard to rule them all and we really, really have to make everything look the same. It's that we need to figure out how to introduce cohesion and interoperability. So what we really need to focus on is things such as open metadata, so that we know who holds what, and we need to focus on data licensing so that we know under what conditions you can share the data, use the data, and make it available, so that those decisions are something that we can make and so that we can remove friction. So currently the situation across the world, realistically, in pretty much every sector other than perhaps banking in some countries, is that it's all focused on bilateral contracts. And what we actually really need to do is look into how we can remove friction and essentially automate the conditions under which you can share data, not just open data, but also shared data, so that we can start making more data accessible and so that we can start making those decisions much faster.
And since you still have the mic, I have a follow-up question for you. You know, when you've talked about probably just respecting the different formats that exist, and when we talk about open data, that is actually one of the biggest challenges, that data is in completely different formats from different people, different sources and stuff. But what types of organizations need to be at the forefront of this change?
Honestly, everyone. We really need everybody across government. So we do really need government and regulator involvement in this, but we also need the incumbents and we need the SMEs to be pushing us. A lot of innovation always comes from SMEs, but we also can't be ignoring the third sector voices. So academia always has a lot to contribute. We have a lot of nonprofits that bring in incredible perspectives. I mean, we see the same thing from COP. Loads of the action at COP wouldn't happen if it wasn't for the entire civil society voice that we see around it. So I don't think that this can be an exclusive conversation. I think we need everybody at the table to start it and also to outline the benefits.
Great. And I'll just figure from what you're talking about in terms of bringing everybody, you know, to the table to have this conversation. Over to you, Païvi. What types of data collaborations are needed to support system level change?
Kind of maybe continuing what Gaia just said about the kind of, I think we need to work on the level of, how would I say, transparency, increasing transparency through data. But then every one of us, every organization, every system should be able to use that data in decision making. And I think that is what brings the benefits. And then related to your kind of, or coming up to your question, Lynette, about what kind of collaboration. At this point of time, I would like to see like really open-minded or ecosystems, value networks with different kind of actors, consumers in there as well, with really open mindsets to develop best practices and a kind of discovering and exploiting rules of game and also, for example, redefining what is, for example, sensitive business data, so that we would be, how would I say, encouraged by good cases, best practices, to be a little bit more open in a kind of creating something new together. So definitely, how would I say, collaboration in different formats to make this happen and really understand the value of data, because I think that's the problem in here, that we don't have those people together that would understand the digitalization part of this, and then really a kind of environmental sustainability part of this. So bringing that competence together.
Exactly. And I wonder if data alone is the issue, Nico. Are there other aspects that are involved? Are we talking about, you know, business models, building technologies like APIs, digital twins? You talked about digital twins earlier, you know, big data, AI, you sit in an AI, you know, partnership. Do these sound like useful types of data infrastructure that need to go in? But we also need to think about, you know, where do people play a role in this? The organizations, the business models, and the policies aligning with it. Where does that leave us? Well,
your question partly answers itself. So I fully agree with what you said. The data itself won't solve it. This is why the title of this panel is witty, is interesting. It's because data, let me give an example. Case of France, an open data policy, very aggressive for the past 10 years. And so there are a number of data sets available for energy transition, for example. Are these data sets getting downloaded? Well, yes and no. Why? Because business models by means of which these data translate into solutions for SaaS are not yet there, because the capacity building within organizations, public and private, big and small, does not yet exist. And because we're not connecting this climate or sector-specific data with domain expertise vis-a-vis machine learning, engineering in those domains. So it's really a question of, okay, the data, the infrastructure, but also the domain knowledge expertise and business models and revenue models. And we need to do that in a way that reconciles East and West, but the North and the Global South. We need to invest ever more, for example, in Africa, as you're doing, to build capacity to create those triangles. And so that's one of the focus areas of my organization, the Future Society. And this is why we're supporting the Global Partnership on AI, GPSDD and others, because this is really where the meat of climate action really is.
Yeah. And you have brought about a very critical point, and one of the questions that we really wanted to address today. And I'll hand this over to Gaia. Talk to us a little bit about what net zero is, one. But then last week I read something that is very sad and something that I think we have known for a while. And this is that Africa produces 4% of global emissions, but studies say that places that produce the least emissions are going to, get the worst effects. So if I can just read that out, it's Africa produces 4% of the global emissions, but studies say places least responsible for the climate crisis will suffer its worst effects. So whose responsibility is it to tackle this crisis?
I think that's a really important point. And I think, again, that's why the COP negotiations are really important. But also, I think we all have to recognise from the perspective of the global north. I mean, I'm sitting here in Bristol today, and I know that the data conversation is often driven entirely by the global north. And it's something that needs to be accessible to all. We need to ensure that these conversations are something that are realistic and relevant to the global south. And we need to listen to all the countries in the global south who are being hit hardest by the climate impacts, by basically poor actions in the north. And we need to look at how we actually need to fund these solutions. I think it's completely, it's so easy to overlook the fact that some data that we assume to be relevant and completely necessary to measure the impacts of climate change or to reach towards solutions isn't even being collected in some places. And we take an incredibly ignorant and one-dimensional view of this. And I think this is why this is a conversation that actually needs to be opened up. And we need to be putting pressure on our decision makers, essentially, to campaign for stronger nationally determined contributions, to actually put their money where their mouth is, essentially, and fund solutions rather than make commitments that don't necessarily lead anywhere.
Great. And now I'm going to go to questions from the audience, and we have a question from Katie. And she says, I think it's very clear how environmental and energy data can help us fight climate change, but is there a place for personal or individual level data to help us support these efforts as well? Païvi, maybe you can help us answer this?
Yeah, maybe I can kind of, because one field we have studied is textiles, and I think that comes pretty close to our everyday lives. And for sure out there, there might be some data that would be useful for us as consumers. For example, specifically in the case of textiles, if we would, for example, know more about how we use textiles, a cloth is normally used like 6 times only. But would that data encourage us to really kind of make sure that those clothes are valuable for us? But out there as well, another example, for example, embedded intelligence is pretty kind of, how would I say, promising in several fields. But in the case of textiles, including some kind of electronic sensors in textiles could be, or clothing could be a recycling nightmare. So in that sense, we need to kind of be, how would I say, be aware of what is the way that we tackle this issue, what's the way to kind of provide information that is really valuable and doesn't kind of raise, for example, ethical questions. So it's a kind of, how would I say, it's difficult, but for sure, commitment awareness is key to make all of this happen. But I would say it's not so straightforward. So out there as well, a lot of questions.
And you raise a very important question when it comes to ethics and how to handle that issue. And that just leads me to the next question, which I'll give to Nico, on how can we support countries and areas with low data infrastructure without pushing Western colonial development agenda. So the ethics really comes in there strong. So Nico, please guide us with this.
Well, responsible AI adoption for development is the imperative for us. And that requires capacity building effort in helping, supporting, and empowering global South governments and civil societies and private sectors to build those pathways, to build these communities in a way that can attract investment, even in a way which is a bit predatory. Do you think that Facebook, Meta, or Amazon are going to be investing in a data center, let's say in Djibouti or in Rwanda, if we put lots of taxes? So initially it will have to be quite enticing. But the key in capacity building is to attract this investment in a way that we feed a function of seeding the local ecosystem so that this investment translates into more than trickling down, empowering local entrepreneurship and innovation ecosystem so that over an industrial cycle, over 10 years, this continued investment can really seed a local techno-industrial base that is more than a set of SMEs. Now requires, in the case of Africa, for example, better regional and continental digital single market integration to enlarge the critical mass of the consumer base, to enlarge the critical mass of the investor base. That's not easy, but that's one of the things that we're trying to do at the Free Society. And that's one of the things that we're trying to plug back into OECD, back into the World Bank, or the world of multilateral and bilateral donors, because that's in a way the price to pay to have a real global conversation on the future of responsible AI adoption.
Great, thank you, Nico. And there's a question here asking, so one of the ways to lower the barriers to entry and remove the blockers that you have mentioned, Nico, would be to produce standardized data products. What data products should we prioritize and focus on making open? Maybe Gaia, you could take this. Yeah.
The classic forgot to unmute. I think that's a really tough one for me to answer because I'm actually not a data scientist. I'm not a data expert in that sense. I work more on the let's figure out what the rules are behind data sharing. I think, and that's actually what my answer really is. I am not sure that we can standardize data products across countries because I think contexts are so important. And again, I think that leads us down a path where we end up in a very, very colonial style approach, basically, where we tell other people how they should be doing things, and it's not cognizant of individual contexts. I think instead what we can do is learn from what worked in other sectors and what worked in countries. So a really important example is, for example, where the UK pioneered the open banking standard, where it figured out the rules for data sharing across banking and open sourced it. And that's now been adopted across 20 different countries and adapted. So what I would say is actually we need to focus more on what can we learn across the board and how can we figure out what those rules are rather than forcing individual products onto contexts that aren't our own.
Great. Maybe we can also hear from you, Païvi. What do you think about this?
What just came into my mind is the digital product passport that European Union is promoting for specific products. That would be a way to kind of create a place and some kind of standard for product related data that should be available. That's a good thing in a way, but still it lacks or it doesn't take a stand on many of the questions that have been raised in this discussion and are open out there. So there is a kind of, how would I say, drivers and actions that would like to take this forward. But as I said, really complex problems. And getting back to what you said, for example, Nico and Lynette, about the global value chains, I think it's definitely something to consider from the business perspective as well. And I would call for corporate digital responsibility in the sense that whatever organizations do, they should definitely consider these questions when they start investing in something. And then they should be aware that what they do when they invest and promote digital initiatives, that they are in line what they are committed to elsewhere, because there seems to be some kind of, how would I say, they are not always in line.
Yeah, that sounds just about right. And over to you, Nico. There's a question on, what is IPPC on AI? So it'd be great to have more information. And another question as well, I think you can tackle this too, is how do digital twins help us tackle climate change?
Well, let me work backwards from the questions. Digital twins, they are a bit hyped, let's be clear about that, but they're like advanced cloud-based simulation models of complex systems. Digital twin simulates a physical system. And for complex physical systems, such as any form of ecological system, such as at the level of planet Earth, a digital twin is a tool for data scientists, for sociologists, for business people to come together and, develop business models and test them. It's a kind of a mega sandbox, if you want. And it's a way also for us to understand before acting and creating responsible feedback loops, as opposed to getting out there in the world, polluting everything by deploying algorithms that end up consuming a lot of CO2, and then realizing that we actually want to include cloud computing in scope 3. This kind of things, project better. Now, what is the IPCC for AI, the global partnership on AI? It's not an IPCC for AI, strictly speaking. The IPCC is the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, created in the late 90s to help the world, to help societies, to help government understand what is climate change, what is causing it, what are its dynamics, what are its consequences, and how do we need to govern them? Well, it's a similar metaphor of AI. AI is a transformative revolution. So what is AI? What are its dynamics? What are its consequences? And how do we need to govern these consequences? Policymakers are a bit lost at times. So this global partnership on AI is there to bridge the gap between theory and practice to help, put out in the world of business and society a number of standards, protocols, business models on the responsible digital governance, responsible future of work, AI, and innovation and commercialization.
Great, thank you. There's a question here from Edward, and he says, I know there's been some progress on opening up energy data in the US, and whilst I understand that different US states work at different paces, I'm finding it interesting. I'm finding it interesting that things are moving so slowly in the UK. Are there any specific reasons that come to mind for that? Yeah, you said you are more involved in how things work, so this should be for you.
Absolutely, thanks. I can't comment on the intricacies of the US system, and I would say that I don't think that things are moving that slowly in the UK. I think we've seen a lot of change, and there's been quite a lot of investment from the government recently, ranging from the Modernising Energy Data Access Programme through to the MEDAPS programme. So that's building applications on top of this. There's quite a lot of, we've seen really, really good recommendations coming out of the Energy Data Task Force and the Energy Digitalization Task Force, and we're seeing some announcements coming up around COP as well. I'd say that I'd really want to actually speak to you directly and understand what it is that you feel is moving really, really slowly, so we can unpack that and I can understand how we can work towards speeding things up.
Great, thank you very much for that. And there is a final question, and I will take this, and this is from Sean Whitfield. And he says, I'm a data engineer and would love to work in the sustainable development sector. I have had a hard time finding a job in this area. Is there a job network? Sean, I would advise that you look up these folks called Omdena. They are a network of global experts, especially in data and AI, and they do a fantastic job when it comes to the development sector and helping, especially within the Global Partnership for Sustainable Development Data. We work with various partners, and they have helped us work with partners in coming up with sustainable solutions when it comes to, agriculture, climate change, and they do a fantastic job. I think that is a fantastic place to start. And if you, reach out to me, I will be able to give you more information and probably plug in a few more contacts for this. So if we do not have any more questions, I would like to give just 1 minute to each of our panelists to give their closing remarks. We can start with you, Païvi. So 1 minute.
Yeah, I think the main message from today is that collaboration is definitely needed and on several levels. We need data to kind of provide us transparency, but that is not enough. We need to make data to solve complex problems. And getting back to what was kind of discussed earlier about electricity grids and energy and open energy data, for example, an example out there that your electric vehicle or electric car could be part of balancing electricity grid, the supply and demand, even without you knowing. So there's a lot that data can do without us knowing that. So we are kind of passive in that sense, but we need to kind of, as a society, we need to be aware of what we need want the data to do. And then for sure, we want to be active as humans as well to make informed choices. So there's at least those two levels in here.
Yeah, thanks, Païvi. Sorry to try and cut you short. Over to you, Nico.
Well, given the climate emergency, we need to reconcile the ecological and the data revolutions in the way that do not sacrifice, but actually uphold the best from our values in terms of democracy, equality, and freedom. And that won't be easy. If we want, in the coming 10 years, to have individual CO2 emission accounts that are powered by AI to help everyone achieve better climate net neutrality targets, we run the risk of massive privacy abuses. So if we want this kind of, potentially horrible solution to come on our tables without the right privacy, fairness, transparency regime in place, that's something, because of the climate emergency, that could come up. And why it is an imperative to move towards responsible AI adoption for the environment is to make sure that we reconcile in practice these things. Come and attend the plenary of the GP next week. We'll talk more about that. November 11 and 12. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Nico. And finally, Gaia.
Thank you, Lynette. I have one key message, which is connect, don't collect. Data increases in value the more it's connected. So hoarding it, keeping it in data lakes is not going to lead us to where we need to go. And I realize that means one of the key things that we've talked about today is that we need a massive culture change. The technology is proven. We've tested it already. We've seen about it. We've seen it in action. And what we need to do is start thinking about data differently. And this is going to be a collaboration between government, regulators, large organizations, small organizations, third sector, all across the board. And we need to take a use case driven approach. So great, I'll pass back to you.
Great, yeah, connect, collect, and think about data differently. I think that is a powerful place to end this. Thank you all for engaging us and for joining our discussion. I think we have all learned some very powerful things and very interesting things in these sessions as well. A special thank you to the panelists that we had today for sharing your work, your ideas, and your thoughts on the issues. And of course, to the ODI for having us. Here's to wishing you all a lovely rest of your day. And thank you again for engaging us. Thank you and bye-bye.